My name's Christian Hunt, and I'm here with Professor Todd Haugh, who has introduced some amazing resources for people who are interested in bringing behavioral science to ethics and compliance. Todd, welcome. Can you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
First of all, thanks, Christian. Happy to be here and happy to be chatting with you. So my name is Todd Haugh. I am an associate professor of business law and ethics at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. My main kind of area of expertise, where I spend all my time teaching and writing, is kind of at the intersection of white-collar crime and corporate wrongdoing, and behavioral ethics and behavioral science. And so I teach classes about judgment decision-making for managers is a big class that I teach. I also teach white-collar crime at the undergraduate level. And then I've taught law topics in other institutions in the past as well.
And so you're very much focused on the practicalities, right? How do we bring some of these academic disciplines and theories into reality? And so that's a key part of both your teaching, but also the stuff that you do outside. And you've recently put together a resource called Business Ethics Bound. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So Business Ethics Bound is a website. That's what it is. But its main function is essentially to be a repository for articles, information, content that relate to behavioral compliance topics. And so what I'm thinking about there is how we use behavioral science and behavioral ethics theories and research in order to do compliance, corporate compliance, and organizational compliance better. And so I've put together a website that has lots of academic resources, but it also has just absolutely practical resources for professors, that might be interested in the topic, for business leaders and ethics and compliance officers who are interested, and also students. And it's a place also where everybody hopefully can kind of come together around these concepts of behavioral compliance.
So you're basically opening up and sharing stuff that you've been collecting over the years, and presumably you're updating it as well as you go.
Yeah, so one way to think about this is like it's a digital repository of my office. And so if I could pan around here, you'd see a messy disaster. But one of the sections of the website I call the behavioral bookshelf. And it's basically, books, articles, and I break those up into what I would call kind of deep dives, heavy research articles that would be published in, academic journals. But also we do sort of quick hits, if you will, which are more practitioner-oriented, shorter pieces that the busy professionals might be interested in. So it's a way of taking all the things that I've collected and what I think are really important as it relates to behavioral compliance, and putting it out there for the rest of the world to sift through. So you get a little bit of kind of like a curated view, from my perspective about what's important in this field.
And tell us about the Learning Lab.
Yeah, so the Business Ethics Learning Lab, or BEL as I call it, it's got kind of two functions. So one is a place to bring people together. So I often have undergraduate and graduate research assistants that work on a lot of these projects. So we kind of call that the Learning Lab in the sense of they're helping me do lots of projects that relate to behavioral compliance. But it's also a place where companies and corporations have come in, and we've worked with companies in order to try to solve a business ethics or a compliance problem that they might have. So it's a collaborative space. And then the third function is it's sort of like, where we just dump everything that we're working on, right? So we've got teaching cases are in the Learning Lab that we've developed that relate to behavioral science and ethics and compliance. We've got infographics that try to, in very simple terms, talk about kind of complex behavioral science concepts, and then just a bunch of other stuff that we've been sort of working on over the last year or two.
And one of the things you're really good at, Todd, is finding stuff that's happened in the news and pulling out the salient points. So can you just give us an example of the sorts of things that you're out there looking at and seeing in the wide world, and then find interesting as case studies?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Christian, you are also very good at that, and so I rely a lot on you and your new book and all that to really try to understand just great little snippets of examples on how to demonstrate some of these topics. But I'm really active, or been very active the last couple of years on LinkedIn. And so, I'm scanning the business press, and I'm scanning behavioral science newsletters to try to find little nuggets that can demonstrate a point better than they may have been, demonstrated somewhere else. And so that is a lot of like the case studies. So I'll take something, a concept from behavioral science, and then we'll look for an example in a company where that idea or that theory or that concept has been demonstrated, mash those together. And I think that's a way that business executives or business people can understand it in a way that's a lot easier than, say, an academic setting where, we're really steeped in reading research articles all day long, which nobody wants to do aside from academics.
And give us an example of a sort of a story that people might have heard in the news that you found particularly interesting.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this goes back, but one of my favorite examples of all time is the Martha Stewart case. That's one that I've talked about a lot, proving up this idea of loss aversion, which is a concept of behavioral science, which is really important. It essentially says we are trying to avoid losses, and we'll actually take a lot of risk in order to do that. And if you know anything about Martha Stewart, most people think that she was convicted of insider trading. She wasn't actually. She was convicted of lying to the government and for obstruction of justice. And the reason she did that is because she was trying to avoid the reputational loss that she would have taken. She never could have been found guilty of insider trading in her life. It is a legal impossibility, yet she lied to government regulators, which ultimately then got her put in prison. So that's one of my favorite examples. And I talk about that in a lot of the work that I do.
And I think what's really interesting is what you've just illustrated is that you talk about the science. So we'll use technical terms like loss aversion, but it's the practicalities of it. Well, how does that manifest? Because we all understand the theory, but how does that manifest itself? And let's have a look at those stories and really dig in and say, this is where we can see that happening in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you can see those in all kinds of current examples. Wells Fargo is another one of my, favorite ones. It's a well-known case. Obviously, they've been in the news a lot lately. You had those 50, 300 employees that we heard about that were making up fake accounts. And there's a big piece of that, which is them rationalizing that bad behavior. So that's a really important concept in white collar crime and wrongdoing. And you can see it in the statements, for example, of some of those employees where they would say things like, creating a fake account, it was like jaywalking, right? No one really, everyone kind of looked the other way. It was a rule. We knew we shouldn't do it, but it was okay. Or, our bosses were putting so much pressure on us that you can see parts of sort of the fraud triangle, which is a really important concept. So just those everyday examples that people like you and I that are in this area trying to make these concepts accessible, pulling those out and attaching them to the theory that really drives it. So it gives practitioners a more sophisticated understanding of what's going on in their own organizations.
And of course, one of the things that's fascinating about these case studies, and when we look at them, is that very often these are situations where there are ethical principles or ethics or compliance programs that are supposed to govern these activities. And so what we can see in the case studies, because clearly you're picking things where something has gone wrong, what we can see in those case studies is that often those theoretical programs don't work. So a lot of the examples that you highlight, it's not that this is the wild, wild west where there are no controls. It's that there are controls and programs and people's beliefs that they're doing the right thing. That's the theory of it. And then we see the realities that human beings are, and we're all capable of doing unethical things that are breaking rules. And so really what you're highlighting here is a tension between the theoretical world of what people ought to do and then the realities of what they can actually do when things go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know, I mean, what sort of the two biggest takeaways from the behavioral ethics research that really goes back probably 15, 20 years now is essentially we're not as ethical as we think we are. All right. And that includes how we look at ourselves, but how we look at other people. So if you're a manager, you tend to think that, well, the people that I've hired, of course, they're going to be ethical, right? Because I wouldn't hire someone that was unethical. Well, we know that's not the case, right? We tend to have a skewed view of both our own ethicality and the ethicality of those around us. So that's one thing. And then the other major finding is our ethical decisions are influenced oftentimes by factors that we don't fully understand or appreciate. And that could be all kinds of things that will come into play, even, time of day, how tired we are, lots of social influences that we don't think of or can identify. And so when you put those together, you get the problem that you're talking about, which is basically we often create rules and educate on those rules out of a certain playbook that doesn't always match up with the realities that behavioral ethics and behavioral science now demonstrates are true. And so what the kind of behavioral compliance mission, is to illuminate that and hopefully do ethics and compliance a little bit better to the benefit of companies and larger society.
And there are increasing numbers of stories of people being unethical and breaking rules. And I guess I'm intrigued. Is it that you and I spend our time looking at these things, and therefore that, because it's what comes to mind, and we therefore assume there's more of it happening? Is there more transparency in these things? Are you seeing any discernible trends on this stuff? Are we getting worse as a species, I guess?
Yeah, I tend to think, maybe this is the optimist in me, but I tend to think things are probably fairly, static, right? So yes, we have a lot more people in the world than we used to, and we have a lot more, business and a lot more transactions. So we're going to see overall numbers, but it's probably generally the same that it has been. I'm sure there's some influences that would make it a little bit easier to cut some of those ethical corners. You can think about transactions that aren't mediated face to face, things like that with technology. But I do think it's important to keep in mind is that the vast majority of transactions, business transactions, human transactions that occur in the world are done in an ethical way. If you really do some back of the envelope math on how many different interactions you've had, either over the course of your life or the course of a company's life, it's going to be in the trillions, right? For all kinds of transactions. And the vast majority of those are done in an ethical, legal manner. However, there are a big subset that aren't. And so our job and our mission is to try to figure out, well, how can we limit and make that little group smaller, as small as possible. And that's a story too of behavioral science, right? We tend to look at the negative a little bit more than we should at the positive. And oftentimes that can influence kind of how we see the world. So we can't forget that there's lots of good out there in the world too.
And to close us out, Todd, remind people how they can find you and how they can find all of the wonderful things you've talked about.
Yeah. So Business Ethics Bound is the website. You can search that up and you'll come. There's all kinds of resources. Behavioral bookshelf. There's some stuff about nudging ethicality, ways to use nudges, for example. It's one tool of behavioral science. And also the ethics, behavioral ethics learning lab. And there's some places where you can click on the website if you want more information about X, Y, or Z, and it'll come to me. There's no grand, infrastructure behind this. So basically come to me. Then the other place, of course, is just my faculty website or LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So if you put my name in, Todd Haugh, you'll find me there.
Excellent. And it goes without saying, but let me say it anyway. This is all absolutely free. You're putting this out there for people to access. And I guess in return for that, Todd, the reciprocity that you probably expect is if people come across interesting stories that they think might be relevant or interesting books that aren't there, that obviously they should share those with you.
Yeah, thanks. And this brings us back to the first question, I think. You're absolutely right. I'm trying to update the site as much as I can. I try to do that on a semi-regular basis. So if there's a great book or an article that you think is really important, let me know about it. But yeah, all this, of course, is free. It's a service in a lot of ways to get the ideas and the concepts about behavioral compliance out in the world. They're out there, but they're not always as accessible and usable as I think they could or should be. So this is my attempt to do that. But yeah, love to hear from anyone that's interested in the topic, interested to learn more, whether you're a student, whether you're a manager at a company, or whether you're another academic or just interested in the concepts. Would love to hear from you and share in the journey and in promoting the concepts.
Amazing. Well, look, on behalf, I've used it. I know other people that have used it. So on behalf of all of us that have, and on behalf of all of the people as a result of seeing this, Todd, are going to start using it. Thank you so much for, one, the research that you do, which is fascinating, but secondly, for putting a tremendous amount of resources out there that is incredibly helpful in what, as you say, can be quite an overwhelming field when you're first starting out and trying to get a handle on things. So thank you so much for all of those things. And thank you for spending the time to share it with us.
Yeah, thanks, Christian.